In the year 711, Umayyad commander Tariq bin Ziyad took advantage of the turmoil in the Iberian Peninsula and launched a successful expedition. Islam became the main religion in Spain in less than a century. The dominance of Islam in the peninsula began to break somewhat in the 9th century with the expeditions of Charlemagne's son, Louis. The successful campaigns of Louis gave encouragement to the Christian kingdoms, which were stuck to the north due to the Muslim advance from the south, and thus the Reconquista, or the reconquest process, began for the Christians. After hundreds of years of conflict, the Christian kingdoms were finally beginning to gain supremacy in Spain. Step by step, they took over Muslim cities. In 1492, Granada, one of the last remaining Muslim cities, fell into the hands of Christians. Thus, the Reconquista was completed. By this time, the population of Muslims in Spain was around 400 to 500,000, while the population of Christians was around 7 million. Their numbers decreased gradually after they migrated to other countries as a result of wars and massacres. The Muslims, who had lost their superiority both militarily and in terms of population, were now left to the initiative of Christians. So what happened to these Muslims who stayed in Spain? How were they treated by Christian kings? Have they managed to keep their own beliefs and cultures afloat? The name given to the Muslims who remained in Spain after the Reconquista was Morisco. The word consisted of a combination of moro, a word which was used for Muslims living in the Iberian Peninsula, and the suffix isco, which means to belong to someone or something. It was actually an adjective meaning belonging to Muslims rather than being a noun. At the end of the Reconquista process, the Moriscos were given religious freedoms in return for not rebelling. However, while these freedoms were applied in some kingdoms and principalities, they were not applied in others. For example, serious pressures could be seen in the Granada region of the Kingdom of Castile from the very first years, while the situation was slightly less tense in Valencia, which was affiliated to the Aragon dynasty. The focal point of the oppression was Granada, which had the highest Morisco population. The Archbishop of Granada, Hernando de Talavera, tried to persuade the Moriscos to convert to Christianity. This attempt failed. Saying this, Cardinal Jimenez de Cisneros decided to take a tougher approach. Not taking seriously the liberties given to the Moriscos, he forced them to convert and set fire to some Islamic texts in public. Thereupon, the Muslims of Granada started a revolt in 1499. The revolt was suppressed in 1501. After the suppression of this revolt, a serious oppression began against Muslims and Islam both in Granada and in other cities where the Moriscos lived. The agreement that had previously given them religious freedom in exchange for their surrender was now annulled. In 1501, the Kingdom of Castile made an open appeal to the Moriscos. They would either accept Christianity by force or leave their homes and lands. Some people left their lands because they did not want to become Christians. Some of them accepted or pretended to accept becoming Christians. The Moriscos who agreed to stay had an interesting and challenging life. In fact, in the first years, the situation was not so bad. Moriscos who had served in various administrative offices during the Islamic Emirate were welcomed by the Christian rulers because they could speak Arabic and knew the region very well. The Moriscos assisted their new lords in collecting taxes in the Granada region, which provided a fifth of the Castile kingdom's revenues. In return, the Christian lords were tolerant of them, ignoring the extremist attitude of the higher authorities. Some were even allowed to perform Islamic behaviors such as praying openly. Nothing much had changed in the daily lives of the Moriscos except for their religious practices. They wore the same clothes, ate the same food, and continued to speak and write in Arabic. In the Kingdom of Valencia, which hosted the largest number of Muslims after Granada, the general situation was not very difficult at the beginning. Valencia was ruled by the Aragonese dynasty during this period. Although this dynasty was politically dependent on the Kingdom of Castile, it was legally independent. In other words, the compulsory conversion rules applied in the Granada region did not apply here at the beginning. The Moriscos here were openly able to live as Muslims. Moriscos knew how to farm in accordance with the conditions of their region. Also, Morisco workers accepted to work cheaper than others. This made them valuable to Christian lords. Many lords in the Valencian kingdom allowed Moriscos to enjoy their own culture and beliefs. However, this good trend started to change as radical Christian groups and the papal authority became more involved in the issue. Starting in the 1520s, the already existing pressure on the Moriscos gradually increased. Inquisition courts were established both in Granada and in kingdoms where a certain number of Moriscos lived, such as Valencia. These courts conducted investigations on behalf of the Catholic Church. It began to be investigated who was truly a Christian. Moriscos under pressure had to adapt to this hostile environment. Some Moriscos living in Castile regions such as Granada were under greater pressure than others. It was more difficult for them to protect their religious and cultural identity than their brethren living in other parts of Spain. Moriscos were trying to be very careful because they shared the same environment with Christians. When they wanted to pray in congregation, they would go to each other's houses in small groups. It was not possible for them to perform Friday prayers. They used to perform the funeral prayers of their deceased relatives and friends secretly at night. Fasting in Ramadan was relatively easier than praying. However, in the following years, some Christians offered food to Moriscos they saw on the street during Ramadan and filed complaints to the Inquisition courts for those who did not eat them. Young people were deprived of basic knowledge of the religion of Islam as religious books were collected and burned by the Inquisition. This became a big problem, especially after the second half of the 16th century, with the death of Moriscos who lived in the Islamic period. Those who had religious knowledge were few, and those who succeeded them did not have many sources from which they could obtain this knowledge. Another area in which Moriscos tried to preserve their religious and cultural identity was names. Their children had to be baptized in the church. After the baptism and Christian naming ceremony, the child was brought home, bathed, and was given a Muslim name. The Moriscos were trying to keep their culture and religious life alive, albeit secretly. These efforts did not go unnoticed by anti-Muslim Christian lords and church officials. More measures were taken to prevent Moriscos from clinging on to their identity. Speaking Arabic was banned in some cities of Spain. This caused Arabic to be forgotten over time. Interestingly, the Arabic script itself was not banned. The Moriscos, who began to have difficulties in using Arabic to transfer their religious texts between generations, wrote their religious works in the Arabic alphabet but with Spanish words. This interesting mixture that emerged was called Al-Jamaido. Thanks to this mix of languages, they were able, albeit with difficulty, pass on religious knowledge among the younger generations, who were beginning to forget Arabic and mostly spoke Spanish. In addition, the young Moriscos preserved their familiarity with the Arabic alphabet to some extent. As the pressure on the Moriscos increased, so did the scope and number of bans. In some cities of Spain, clothing bans were imposed on Moriscos. In particular, women were forbidden to cover themselves according to the rules of Islam. The oppression was also a problem for the Christian nobles who tried to be tolerant towards them. For example, Admiral Sancho de Cardona of Aragon was sentenced to life imprisonment for allowing Muslims to build a mosque and pray on his territory. As a result of increasing pressure, the Moriscos of Granada started a rebellion in 1568 under the leadership of Muhammad bin Umayyah. The Moriscos, who constantly communicated with the Ottomans, asked them to organize a sea expedition. Sultan Selim II was busy with the conquest of Cyprus during this period. He could not send the expected support. Nevertheless, Algerian governor of the Ottomans was able to send some supplies, weapons and soldiers through Kılıç Ali Pasha. However, this was not enough. The rebellion was suppressed in 1571 with the death of Muhammad bin Umayyah. Thereupon, the Muslims in the borders of the Kingdom of Castile, which included Granada, were driven away from the cities and exiled to the rural areas of the country. Fearing that the Christian kingdoms would be endangered by the Muslims collaborating with the Ottomans and their French allies, the church officials and kings decided to exile all the Moriscos. Hundreds of thousands of Moriscos were forcibly evicted from their homes and lands in exile, which began in 1609 and continued until 1614. The vast majority of Moriscos settled in Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. A lesser part went to the Ottoman cities such as Thessalonica, Belgrade, Izmir, Istanbul, and Adana. There were also small Morisco communities that went to France, England, and Italy. Ottoman Sultan Ahmed I sent letters to the English and French administration, demanding that Moriscos who came to their country be treated well and sent to Ottoman lands. Edicts were sent to the Algerian and Tunisian governors ordering the Moriscos to be taken under protection. Thus, immigrants were settled on state-owned lands, exempted from tax for 5 years, and navy-savvy recruits were employed in the navy. The Moriscos proved themselves in the fields of agriculture, trade, craft, art, science, and literature in a short time. Thanks to the irrigation techniques they used and the new product types they introduced, they transformed the lands they settled into fertile agricultural areas. Native people learned from them how to drain water sources into houses and fountains through channels. With the contributions of Rabat, Saleh, Tetouan, and Tunisia Moriscos, the people of these lands started to come to the fore in the fields such as trade, art, and literature. The fact that the Moriscos established many foundations after a certain period of exiles gives an idea of the economic level they reached in their new lands. Moriscos made significant contributions to the societies they lived in with their unique music, folklore, traditions, knowledge in the fields of mathematics, logic, philosophy, and their unique architectural style. It became very difficult to keep track of the histories of some Moriscos after the exile. Although some are said to have returned to their lands in Spain, it is possible that they have completely lost their legal rights and, at least in appearance, completely assumed Christian identity. However, the presence of religious books written in Aljamedo in some houses during this period indicates that there were small groups of Moriscos who remained in Spain and secretly lived as Muslims despite oppression and exile. Moriscos have gained an important place in the history of Islam, both with the pressures they experienced and the cultural and economic contributions they made to the regions in which they settled.